Hey everyone, I'm back with another patch notes rundown. Today we're going to be talking about patch 9.4, the Jade Emperor update. It's coming out on Tuesday, April 19th. There are a bunch of different things being nerfed, basically just a shit ton of them. That being said, a lot of the nerfs are fairly simple, just taking some damage down a notch and things like that, but there are 29 gods being nerfed, 37 items being nerfed, 8 relics being nerfed, so I'm not going to take a lot of time with the simpler nerfs. I'm going to try to blast right through those, but I will be going over every single one of those changes in this video, so let's get started. The first change that's happening is an overall change to crowd control. Basically, they're increasing the CC duration reduction from 33% less CC to 40% less CC on subsequent crowd control abilities. So if you get stunned once and then stunned again, that second stun is now 40% less effective than it was before. So overall what that means is that all your CC chains, if you get hit by multiple crowd controls one after the other, that those secondary crowd controls are just not going to last as long, which I do think will be a nice little quality of life change for everyone across the board. The first set of items receiving nerfs are the Belt of Frenzies and the associated upgrades. The Belt of Frenzy, the Greater Belt of Frenzy, and the Belt of Insatiable Hunger all going from 15% damage buff to 10% damage buff, and the Belt of the Berserker going from 25% damage buff to 20% damage buff. The important thing to remember with these changes is that is damage dealt to all targets, including objectives. So all these are pretty significant because you're going to be doing less damage across the board with these items. These are staple items, and I don't know if they're going to necessarily go away because of these changes, but just know that they're going to be doing a little bit less effective damage for your teammates. The next set of items seeing nerfs are the Bracer Tree, the Bracer of Radiance, the Greater Bracer of Radiance, and the Bracer of Illumination, which has a condition of if you or your teammates are above half health and you walk through that little field, you get 15% increased power. That is now moving down to 10% increased power. The other upgrade in the Bracer Tree, the Bracer of Brilliance, doesn't have any conditions on it. It's just whenever you move through the field, you get 20% increased power buff. Now that is moving from 20 to 15%. So overall, again, 5% less power on all of these items. Chronos Pendant is the next item getting nerfed, decreasing the magical power by 10 from 100 to 90, but this item is so statted and it has such a good passive that it's still going to be a really good core item for most mages. Rod of Tahuti and all of its upgrades as well, getting a decrease in magical power from 140 to 120. Similar to Chronos Pendant, this item just has a lot of other stats attached to it. Magical penetration percent, MP5, passive that allows you to do more damage to low health enemies. So I still don't think that this is going to fall completely out of meta, but usually when this has power reductions on it, we see things like Doom Orb kind of come back for just that pure power. Divine Ruin also getting a flat 10 off of its power. Don't overthink this one. It's an anti-heal item. You're going to need this in most of your builds, so continue building it. Same idea with Spear of Desolation, decreasing that magical power from 120 to 110, but if you're a god that wants cooldowns and needs a little bit of pen, Spear of Desolation is still going to be a go-to item for you. Next nerf is Telkhines Ring. This one is a little bit less straightforward, so we're going to spend a little bit more time on it. The base stats, attack speed moving from 25% to 20%, so you're going to be attacking 5% slower. But the thing to really understand with this one is that 15% on bonus attack damage, that 15% of your magical power is now also going down to only 10% of your magical power. So that's not going to scale as hard. I think this is kind of a double nerf for this item, and some of the gods affected by that are obviously the magical ADCs, the Oleruns, the Freyas, the Chronoses of the world. It just hurts them almost twice as much because it is two little nerfs to the same kind of damage. Ring of Hecate also seeing a couple nerfs, decreasing that magical power from 90 to 80 and that base attack speed from 25% to 20%, but it's still going to have some of these other stats on it like 15% magical lifesteal, which is valuable, and then the passive is unchanged as well. So that stacking power buff and power reduction on your enemy is just going to feel a little bit better compared to the Telkhines nerf. So this is a little bit easier of a nerf on Hecate. Caduceus shield also having a decrease in physical power from 30 to 25. If you're not leaning into a all heal comp or something like that, I just really don't see the value in this item. All the other shields have more power and just more utility overall, so I think this is just one of those ones that you probably want to stay away from moving forward. Breastplate of Valor and the associated glyphs also having a decrease in physical protection from 65 to 55. Still a good item. You get that cooldown reduction, you have MP5 and mana, and both of the glyphs have their uses. Determination, if you're really being focused, you get double protections once you hit the full stacks that you need. And Vigilance has the utility where if you ult, you have 15% reduced basic damage from enemies, so kind of a better initiation tool, but this is still going to be a good item. You're just not going to have quite as much defense on it. Ancile getting a power reduction going from 50 to 40. This item is still, I think, sneakily good, especially into any sort of magical character that has a channel, right? The Bacchus is the Cerberus of the world. You can interrupt what they're trying to do very, very effectively. So underrated item. I think it's going to still be good. Mystical Mail getting a decrease in passive base damage from 25 to 20. So now you're doing 20 plus 1 level per second damage instead of 25 plus 1 per level. I still think that this is an item that you can fit into builds in Joust if you are really dive heavy. It's just extra damage DPS that you're doing kind of passively. So I think it's still a pretty good item overall. Bulwark of Hope also having 10 magical protection stripped away from it. Another item that I think can be super useful in Joust. Just the passive alone, getting that health shield that scales with health is really good on Guardians. So I think it's kind of still an underrated item. Use it if you really need that last bit of survivability. CCR always helps too, to just help you from getting focused out if you're the front line. Hide of the Nemean Lion also having a little bit of a shift to the way the block stacks work. So now instead of preventing 100% of that basic attack damage, it's only going to prevent 50%. This is an item that has a lot of physical protections on it, but in Joust specifically, you kind of have to lean into a hybrid build, and that doesn't really fit very well into a Nemean Lion build. So I think this is just an item that you really don't build very often at all in Joust. The Crusher having 5% attack speed reduction on it. This shouldn't really make a difference. I think the people that were building this anyways kind of build it for that passive, that additional damage over time. So you can still feel fine about building this item early, especially on those more ability-based gods. Hydra's Lament having that passive damage scaling from the additional auto attack after using an ability, going from 40% extra damage to 35% extra damage. As far as pure damage items go, I think there are just better options, and now that you have less damage on this item, I don't think it's going to be very popular at all. You can use it on certain gods that are really good auto canceling abilities, but still just a very, very niche item. Jotunn's Wrath and all of the associated glyphs also having a 5 decrease in physical power. Still a good item, still going to be kind of, I'm sure, key for most people. You have the stacking damage on Ferocity, you have the lifesteal proc on Jotunn's Vigor, so overall just still a good item. Just know now that it's going to do a little bit less damage overall. Serrated Edge getting a couple nerfs, decreasing that physical power from 35 to 30, and then decreasing that passive physical power from 10 to 8 per stack when you have those abilities on cooldown. To me, this item is just already kind of expensive for Joust. Now that you have less power and less stacking power on the passive, I just think it's really going to be hard to buy this item. Maybe you keep it as that like last cap off the build item because it has that % pen, but I don't know. I think there's just better items you can get that are cheaper and more stat efficient. Aussie getting the physical lifesteal toned down from 20% to 15% on the stats. As long as it has its passive effect, I think this item is still gonna work. And unfortunately, there's really just nothing that hunters can replace this item with, so I still think this is probably going to be a fairly popular second item for most hunters in Joust. Atalanta's Bow decreasing the attack speed from 25 to 20%. Pretty kind of spendy item for Joust, and the passive plus the critical strike chance. Not really things that you can use super effectively in Joust, so I still think this is not an item that's going to be picked up too often. Similar to Atalanta's Bow, Wind Demon is an item that works well in crit builds, but aside from that, I don't really think it has much use in Joust. The passive duration being decreased from 5 seconds to 4 seconds, where you can get that % pen, the attack speed, and the movement speed, so I think it's even just less relevant with this nerf. Deathbringer and all the associated glyphs also having their physical power decreased from 55 to 50. Similar to the other two crit items that we just went over, it's just hard to build into crit in Joust. It kind of takes too long, and usually by the time you would build an item like this, the game is already over, so this won't affect Joust too much, but just know that if you do finally get Deathbringer online, it's just gonna have a little bit less power. Gauntlet of Thebes having the base health decrease from 300 to 250, not only on the base item, but the evolved item. This shouldn't change when you build this item really at all. Still super stat efficient. It gives you HP 5 and you have an aura for your teammate. So don't let this discourage you from getting Gauntlet. It's still good. Pridwen, another item that's getting a little bit of a decrease on that shield health from the scaling from its protection. So now 100% is not going to be scaled over to that additional shield when Pridwen pops, but only 90%. Same thing with Gauntlet of Thebes. This item just has way too many other stats on it for this change to really affect too much. So Pridwen will still definitely be good in Joust. Sovereignty has 5 less physical protection on the item itself, but you buy Sov for the passive. You're still giving your allied gods 15 protections and HP 5, so still one of the best defensive items to me in Joust overall. Heartward getting a decrease in magical protection provided from the passive aura from 20 to 15, so you're giving your teammates less of that magical protection passive. I think this kind of hurts honestly more than the sovereignty nerfs, and that applies to both of the glyphs as well on Amulet. So again, not quite as useful for the team, which I think actually hurts it a little bit more. Celestial Legion Helm is one of those items that I don't think gets picked up very often, but I definitely think has its uses in Joust. If you're going into like a double warrior team and you're getting dove a lot as a mage, I think it can be a pretty decent item. The problem is now it's going to take longer for you to get those physical stacks, and it's going to take longer for that to like refresh the duration too. So I don't know, it's still a pretty cheap item that you can get, but it's going to take longer for those things to happen, so maybe a little less valuable overall. Vampiric Shroud, power getting nerfed by 10 as well. I think this actually really hurts this item in Joust. At this point now, there are just so many other starters that you can use that give you more power. It's just really not going to be worth it to get Vampiric anymore. Mantle of Discord having its physical protections and magical protections reduced by 5, which isn't a huge deal in the big scheme of things, but the increased cooldown on the passive from 90 seconds to 100 seconds, where you're getting that shockwave, is kind of why you buy Mantle. I think that really hurts the viability of this item, especially because it is a fairly expensive item. There are probably just other things that you can get that are going to work better, maybe something like a Bulwark or something that's going to make you survive a little bit more effectively now that that stun can't be relied on. Archmage's Gem getting a little bit of a rework. This item is no longer going to proc and consume those stacks unless a god is damaged. I'm not 100% sure how this worked before, but it must have been proccing on like minions or jungle bosses or something like that. So you're going to have a little bit more consistent damage from Archmages. Unfortunately, that also means that some of the damage is going to be scaled down a bit too. So more consistent damage on the people you want, but less of that damage overall. On to the god changes now. Tiamat getting a nerf on her Primordial Onslaught. That's that first kind of machine gun ability. A little bit less damage to the later stages, kind of staying the same in that first tier. But she's not very good early on anyways in Joust. That doesn't change that. It just makes her a little bit worse late. But again, she has other abilities that she can use in Joust to be effective. Her ultimate is up so often that she can use that in various different ways. So she's still going to be good as a god in Joust. I think probably B-ish, A-ish tier. So I don't think this change will affect her too much. Agni having some nerfs to his combustion, decreasing the power scaling on that, and also decreasing the damage and the power scaling on his ultimate Rain Fire. I think Agni is probably one of the best poke gods right now in Joust overall, so this change to me is pretty necessary. It'll take his damage down a notch and it'll just make him a little bit less safe. Persephone, another one of those super annoying poke gods. Harvest having a damage decrease on it, that scaling going from 80 to 70%, and the bite damage from the plants also having less scaling on it. That's one of the most annoying abilities in the game, in my opinion. And Grasp of Death, the ultimate, now no longer going to apply attack speed reduction to somebody inside that cage, so you can get out a little bit easier. She'll still be good in Joust just by the nature of her kit, but hopefully at least a little bit less oppressive. Soul getting a couple nerfs too, decreasing the base damage on Stellar Burst at later levels, and then Supernova decreasing that power scaling from 50% to 45% on her ultimate. So realistically, this just means she's not going to be able to burst down people quite as easily. But to me, Soul's utility in Joust is just that ADC being able to shred objectives super quickly, so I don't think this will affect her that much in Joust. Thoth getting a couple nerfs as well, and I think I speak for every Joust main when I say thank God. Hieroglyphic Assault, the main kind of poke damage, that increase on successfully hitting a god going from 20% to 15% per shot, that will actually tone him down quite a bit. The cooldown reduction also being decreased so he can't spam it quite as often. And then Final Judgment, his ultimate, getting a little bit of a decrease in power scaling as well by 5%. But realistically, that Hieroglyphic Assault nerf, I think, will be substantial enough to kind of keep him a little bit more out of those games, so you're not seeing him poking in the high level games like you were before. Joust, similar to Thoth, one of those sit back and throw your abilities out, poke the enemies down so they have to back kind of play styles. Chain Lightning getting a nerf on the damage, also getting a nerf on the slow, and then Detonate Charge, that kind of burst damage from him, also getting a little bit of a nerf. So hopefully this kind of pushes Zeus out of those games too. He's such a boring guy to play against. I don't think he's fun at all to play against or as, so hopefully this pushes him a little bit more out of that Joust meta. Achilles getting a nerf to his passive Gift of the Gods, so decreasing that protection bonus per level. Instead of 2, he now has 1.5 extra per level, or if he's in his other stance, Physical Power, he's only getting 1.5 per level instead of that 2. Also, Shield of Achilles in that targeter, if he doesn't hit that close range stun on the shield, you're going to be doing 70% of that damage instead of 75. So his long range pokish damage is going to go down a little bit. It's going to make him get in a little bit closer to get his damage off, which hopefully should balance him out a little bit, but realistically he still has an execute in a 3v3 game mode, so Achilles will definitely still be good. Chalk also getting some kind of hilariously uncalled for nerfs, decreasing the self-healing in his physical power scaling from 15% to 10% on Rain Dance, so a little bit less sustain, and then his ultimate getting a 15-second extra cooldown on it, so you're not going to be able to spam it as often, which he really does rely on his ultimate to be kind of effective. I think this hurts Chalk quite a bit. I'm going to say you're probably not going to see him very often anymore just because of this change. Gilgamesh also getting his 8th round of nerfs, or whatever it is at this point, decreasing that Sunforged Scimitar buff duration from 4 to 3 seconds and decreasing that maximum buff duration from 7 to 6. So at that point now he can only have that initial buff for a total of 9 seconds instead of 11. Also decreasing the bonus damage to go down a little bit, 0.5% on the scaling from his max health per hit. So building him tanky isn't going to be as beneficial. Winds of Shamash decreasing the binding damage on that physical power scaling from 60 to 50%, which is pretty substantial. And then the wind wall slow, you're going to be slowed a little bit less, so you can hopefully get out of that ultimate a little bit more effectively. I still think a lot of Gilgamesh's utility in Joust specifically is the jump initiation into the drop kick like burst. So we'll see if this changes anything. Maybe it will. I guess we'll have to see what these changes bring. Another kind of head scratcher set of nerfs, Mulan getting nerfed on the cross strike, decreasing the physical power scaling from 35% to 30 per hit. And then Spear Thrust decreasing that bonus damage when hitting the same target from the upgraded Spear Thrust from that 20 to 80 to 20 to 60, so a little bit less damage late, and then decreasing that physical power scaling when hitting the same target with both hits of that Spear Thrust from 15% to 10%. So in Joust, I think Mulan really excels early then falls off late, and really these set of nerfs really hurt her in that respect too. So unless you're trying to really start into like a snowball type comp with Mulan and getting those kills early, I don't think this is going to be a great pick in Joust for that reason. Shiva getting nerfed in this patch and also got nerfed in the bonus update, so I'm just going to go over all of those changes at once here. Increasing the cooldown on Pillar of Dawn from 16 scaling to 18 seconds to now 18 seconds cooldown at all ranks, can't use it as often. Also in this latest update, the Pillar of Dawn is going to be able to get stunned out of that ability. So if you have a stun, you can stop that Shiva from kind of being so aggressive or getting away as often as he has been able to. And then the Shiva Tendava, his ultimate, decreasing that physical power scaling on the damage from 45 to 40% per hit, so not quite as oppressive when he's just diving you CC immune and doing damage at the same time. Bologna getting hit with a couple nerfs too. Shield Bash decreasing that slow from 15 scaling to 35% to 10% scaling to 20%. That is actually a very significant nerf. That hurts her viability quite a bit. It allows people to get away from her more often, which that's kind of what she needs to do, is stick to you. And then decreasing the spin damage on Bludgeon from 45 scaling to 165 to 35 scaling to 155. Again, this ability is already super easy to interrupt, so now that it's doing less damage and less confirmable damage anyways, I think this is really just going to put Bologna pretty far down in any sort of warrior tier list for Joust specifically. Camazot's alt getting nerfed a little bit, decreasing that base damage from 100 scaling to 260 per hit to 100 scaling to 240 per hit. Honestly, I think there are enough other things in Camazot's kit, from sustain to damage with his abilities, that this doesn't really affect his viability too much in Joust at all. You're doing less damage with that ult for sure, but he has enough else going on that he can still be effective. Some absolutely flabbergasting nerfs coming out to Arachne as well, of all people. So her basic attack damage increase going down to 1.25% for every 5% of a target's missing health, and Venomous Bite decreasing that power scaling from 10% to 8% per tick. If you've ever seen my videos before, you know how little I think of Arachne in Joust specifically. She's dog shit. I think this makes her worse, so just stay away from her in Joust. Kleena getting a set of nerfs to Banshee's Wail, decreasing that final hit physical power scaling from 70 to 60%. Lurching Claw also decreasing that power scaling from 85 to 80%, and Tearing the Veil, the ultimate, decreasing that opening damage power scaling from 70 to 60%. Kleena is still going to be good. Make no mistake about it. It's just a little bit less of that burst damage over on top of her makes her a little bit more risky and not as priority of a pick. Loki getting a couple nerfs, one to his passive Behind You, decreasing that base damage bonus damage from 20% to 15% on basic attacks from behind, and then Vanish, where he disappears, decreasing some of that bleed damage on the power scaling from 25% to 20% per tick. I don't think Loki's a huge priority pick in Joust anyways, but you just aren't going to be able to use him as that kind of sneaky character as effectively anymore, which I think he can be used almost more effectively in like a hybrid role in the current Joust meta. Tsukiyomi getting a couple nerfs too, increasing the cooldown from 10 to 12 seconds on Dark Moon Shuriken, and then decreasing the bonus damage power scaling from 40% to 30% on the ranged follow-up after Silver Moon Caltrops. So just kind of nerfing his ability to poke from distance, which I do think is probably a good thing overall for someone like an assassin. Another nerf that I myself as a tank main am happy to see, decreasing the swarm physical power scaling damage from 80% to 75% from AMC, and then also the Stinger decreasing that physical power scaling from 110% to 100%, and decreasing the slow from a scaling 20 to 30% to 20% at all ranks. So this god is super impressive in Joust. He is kind of one of the best picks right now overall. I'm really hoping that this takes him down a notch. I think the slow on the honey is just kind of a lot to deal with right now in Joust too, but I do think this will make him not quite as good. Apollo getting a nerf to his ultimate Across the Sky, decreasing the physical power scaling from 30% to 25% per tick. Apollo not really that great of a Joust god specifically, and his ultimate can't be used super effectively in Joust either, so I don't think this really increases or decreases his viability. He was not that viable to begin with. Hou Yi, Mark of the Golden Crow, decreasing that damage increase from 3 to 7% to 2 to 6%. I think this will hurt kind of some of that burst ability for Hou Yi, but he does have some team utility with his ultimate and escapability, so I think he'll still be a pretty good pick in Joust. Also, he has the bounces that are always going to be viable, so it will hurt him a little bit as far as just bursting people down really quickly, but overall, he'll still be good. Izanami seeing decreased attack speed on Sickle Storm from 55 to 75% buff, now going only up to 65% on that. She is not super viable in Joust. You can use her to kind of split push, I guess, if there is a thing in Joust, or just farm camps, but realistically, I don't think she's super good, and this doesn't really affect her too much. Medusa, one of the hunters that I do think probably actually deserves this nerf, decreasing the attack speed on that Viper shot from 40 scaling to 80% to 40 scaling to 60%, and then Lacerate also decreasing that physical power scaling from 80 to 70 on that initial dash, just a little bit less burst ability and a little bit less kind of comboing off of those two abilities to burst somebody down quickly. Still pretty good in Joust. Her kit still allows her to just do a lot of other things, but that burst ability just isn't quite going to be there as much as it was. Artio, the first Guardian on our list here, seeing nerfs. She is getting a decrease in base damage on that Energy Surge, that kind of cone ability in Druid stance, from 80 scaling to 200 to 60 scaling to 200, so less early on. And then the Heavy Charge, which is the Bear Dash, also getting a little bit of a nerf there. all the way around, so basically her kit's just going to do less damage than it did before. Atlas Kinetic Charge, decreasing the base damage on it from 80 scaling to 300 to 80 scaling to 280, and then the magical power scaling also going from 45 to 40% on that. So a little bit less of that kind of burst damage when he dashes at you. To me though, I think the 1 is really where he is oppressive in Joust, so I don't think this really puts him down anywhere where he wasn't before in Joust. He's still going to be one of those top picks, in my opinion, from the Guardian class. Ares Shackles seeing a nerf, decreasing the god damage from 25 scaling to 105 per tick to 20 scaling to 100 per tick. So maybe not quite that ability to solo somebody at level 1 with chains, but realistically in Joust, if you are hitting those chains, that's still a lot of damage that your teammates should be able to follow up on. So Ares still should be good into certain comps. Bacchus seeing a nerf to his ultimate Intoxicate, decreasing that base damage from 250 scaling to 550 down to 230 scaling to 510, and then the magical power scaling also decreased on it, so you're not going to have that kind of instant burst ability from his ultimate that you had before. He still does a lot of damage in Joust. He's still tanky, so I think he'll still be a really good pick regardless, but you may not be able to solo people quite as easily. Cabrakan also seeing some nerfs. Seismic Crush his 1, decreasing that base damage from 100 to 280 to 80 to 260, and then Tectonic Shift, decreasing that magical power scaling from 70% to 60%. Probably trying to get rid of that instant burst combo with the 1 into the Tectonic Shift into the 3 into the 2 kind of thing. So really he's just going to have less of that instant damage as a Guardian, which I do think is okay. Cerberus also seeing nerf to his Paralyzing Spit, his 1 ability, decreasing that damage from 50 to 170 to 40 to 160. So as you can see, that decreases damage by 28 if hit by all 4 hits on those ranks. I don't think that's a super significant nerf. Cerb is still going to do a ton of damage, so I think if you were valuing him before, this isn't going to put him down by any means. Bastet was another god that had a nerf in the bonus patch, but I'm just going to go over it here in case you missed it. Increasing the cooldown on Pounce from 12 seconds at all levels to 14, scaling down to 12 seconds, and then Razor Whip, decreasing that damage per tick from 30 to 110 to 30 to 90. So still going to have that early game kind of tick damage going, but a little bit less punishing late. So that's it. That's the 9.4 update. All of the god changes, all the item changes. There were a ton of them. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. You must have found something valuable here. So please leave a like, comment, subscribe. I hope you learned something, and I hope this makes your games easier. Thanks so much. Bye.